Hello, and welcome to our talk today, Development of a Paiute Native Plant Center, presented by me, Jackie Grant, from Grand Staircase-Escalante Partners, and Autumn Gillard from the Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah. We're really glad to be here to present this information to you. Native plants are part of our national infrastructure, and they are supported by Biden's 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the bill, and his Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA. These two laws help provide funding for transportation, energy and power, broadband, water, resiliency, environmental remediation, and Western water infrastructure. And you can see that I have resiliency highlighted here in red. About $46 billion have been set aside for resiliency related to the climate and the environment. And of that amount, $1.4 billion has been set aside for plants and ecosystem restoration. If we look at the graph in total, what we can see is that resiliency is a smaller fraction of the pie, but still $46 billion is nothing to sneeze at. And we can see that, as you might expect for an infrastructure budget, transportation takes up the lion's share at $284 billion. More funding is coming into these different categories through the Inflation Reduction Act, but today we are going to focus on resiliency and the use of native plants and restoration in our projects. The guidance for using these funds is coming from the National Seed Strategy for Rehabilitation and Restoration. This strategy was written in 2015 by a consortium of different federal and non-federal agencies and is primarily authored by the Plant Conservation Alliance. The National Seed Strategy has 4 major goals, and within each of those goals are many sub-goals. The first goal, which really relates to our project, is identifying the seed needs and ensuring the reliable availability of genetically appropriate seed for different types of projects around the country. This ties into the Bureau of Land Management's Seeds of Success program, which you can see in the figure at the right, which begins with seed collection. So out in the field, we send crews to collect seeds from wild plants that are usually native plants, so that those seeds can then be used for evaluation and development to determine which species are propagatable to be used in future production. Once the seeds have passed the first test of evaluation and development, they can then go on to field trials, which are small-scale trials of different native plant species to determine how well they are going to produce in agricultural settings. From there, the successful species go on to production to produce the thousands to millions of seeds that are needed for restoration efforts. Those seeds have to have somewhere to go, and so they go into storage into fairly large-scale seed banks throughout the country, where they can be stored until needed to complete the cycle for restoration efforts out in the field where they're needed after development and disturbance of the land. In all of this work, which, believe me, is substantial, there has not been a lot of tribal perspective until quite recently. And for our project, we're really interested in knowing about what plants are important to Native American communities, how were plants harvested and used by tribes, what is the relationship between plants and native heritage and the preservation of culture, and then how can we develop these partnerships that focus on plants among tribes, federal agencies, and nonprofits to enhance the benefits to all of these groups. With that in mind, Autumn and I, and several other members of the Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah started working together as far back as 2017 to think about different ways that native plants can be incorporated into our work together. And this has culminated in the Paiute Native Plant Center, which we were successful in getting funding for this past year. We have several goals in this area, primarily among which are to provide learning opportunities for the tribe, for volunteers from the community, and for students in the area. We'd also like to get more tribal input into species selection at the national scale. So as you can imagine, many species of plants are chosen because they are good for cattle, they're good for ungulates, or they're good for other types of wildlife. We hope to produce some seedling greenhouses because seedlings are an important part of restoration efforts as well as cultural uses. We hope to create a production field where the tribe can grow out seeds in a sufficient quantity to start having an economic impact on their activities. We will produce a common garden research area to allow researchers who are interested in native plants and how they respond to different climate opportunities to be produced. We will do some seed cleaning because wild seeds come in and they are not like a bag of beans. They require sometimes extensive cleaning, and they can be thorny or allergenic. And then finally, we'll work on small-scale restoration seed banking, which is this temporary storage of seeds until they can be used for restoration efforts. And with that, I will turn things over to Autumn.
Hello and welcome to the portion of the presentation about 1,000 years of gardening, a Southern Paiute ethnobotany experience, presented by me, Autumn Gillard, Cultural Resource Manager for the Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah. So what is ethnobotany? Ethnobotany is the study of how people of a particular culture and region make use of indigenous native plants. Plants provide food, medicine, shelter, dyes, fibers, oils, resins, gums, soaps, waxes, latex, tannins, and even contribute to the air we breathe. Many native peoples also use plants in ceremonial or spiritual rituals. Southern Paiutes as ethnobotanists. It is a cultural value to be knowledgeable of plants as a Southern Paiute person. And Southern Paiute botany was first studied by John Wesley Powell during his work of exploring the Grand Canyon and Colorado Plateau, specifically on his 1871 expedition. Southern Paiute people believe that all plants have a spirit and that it is up to us to continue the use of the plants in a traditional manner or they will cease to exist. Work that Jackie and I are doing to ensure seed collecting, seed cleaning, and seed storage amongst the Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah tribal population will help to ensure and persevere that spirit of being able to continue the use of the plants in a traditional manner. Southern Paiute people are more than a hunter and gatherer society. Our ancestors did practice agriculture. If this is one fact that I cannot stress enough to others outside of our cultural group to understand, is that yes, our ancestors were very highly nomadic, moving throughout territories along the Colorado Plateau and Great Basin. But there were many times and many historic instances where Southern Paiute people would garden along rivers, spring areas, and tributaries of larger river masses. It is through this connection of the water and growing seeds to a large plant that we establish our connection as traditional ethnobotanists. Passing traditional knowledge. Knowledge of traditional word use of plants is one way that we continue to pass this traditional knowledge down from generations. And speaking of generations, we speak while we teach to pass this information generationally from one generation to the next. Knowing our stories and what season to speak out loud is understanding how plants work. So if you have a good understanding of our traditional stories and some of the plants that are connected to those stories, it helps us have more of a cultural awareness when we are sharing with one another generationally on how to speak about our plants and in which season they would typically be utilized. Astronomy knowledge and how the moon operates is an important component for also passing plant knowledge as well as understanding seasonal changes. So in terms of astronomy knowledge, it is the full moon in June that we traditionally focused on to get an indication of when the monsoon season would begin. And that is when we would traditionally start to plant our Three Sisters gardens, which are made up of squash, corn, and beans. You also had to have a knowledge of where sacred water sites and springs are located or once were located. This helps to ensure that we continue to have a teaching and an understanding of our relationship with water as a desert people. Water is one of the most sacred components and elements that we have here on Mother Earth. And learning how to operate within her and how her relationship with plants flow is a significant connection for us to passing down our traditional knowledge. We also have to have an understanding of traditional plant use for food, fiber, or medicine. So through the seeds that we will be cultivating within the Southern Paiute greenhouse, we need to understand how those plants will be utilized for food, fiber, or medicine amongst our tribal people or for other agencies outside of us. If we are going to provide seedlings to agencies outside of us, we must understand the traditional use that those plants would ultimately be obtained for. Agriculture and the Southern Paiute. Many social scientists have argued that the Southern Paiute people were not an agrarian culture. This theory came from a colonistic mindset that was used as evidence to defer Southern Paiute people's connection to early ancestral Puebloan sites that had high indication of living as agrarian cultures along river tributaries such as the Santa Clara River, the Virgin River, the Colorado River, and even the Sevier River. Proof of Southern Paiute gardening can be connected to the cultural belief that we descend from the ancestral Puebloan people. Within our cultural teachings, we are taught from early childhood that we do descend from the old ones or the early occupiers here on our traditional landscape that we refer to as Yanawant or our Holy Land. Language is also another indication of descent of Puebloan tribes, or the dialect connection that we share to the Hopi Nation. Southern Paiute people are Uto-Aztecan speaking people, specifically Southern Numic, and share that language base with the Hopi tribe. Gardening has been happening in areas like Pipe Spring for more than 1,000 years. Pipe Spring National Monument is home to one of the largest aquifers along the Colorado Plateau that was traditionally utilized by the Southern Paiute people. For over 1,000 years, there is high evidence of agricultural and gardening happening around this spring location. Pottery is another indication of connecting to the Virgin Anasazi. This evidence can be seen in the type of ancestral pottery that was left behind by our ancestors. Oya pots, which are typically dug underneath ground and allowed to fill with rainwater, and then the water seeps out of the clay into the soil, feeding small seeds that had been traditionally planted. Other indications can be seen in seed pots and pottery made from basketry. Seed trades are also another great indication of Southern Paiute seed use. Many oral histories have been taught about migratory trade routes that the Southern Paiute people would utilize to trade seeds with other tribes living along the Grand Canyon. And lastly, I would like to say Ayuk, thank you to all who are listening and attending to this presentation. It has taken a lot of hard work between Jackie and myself to ensure that this traditional knowledge of seed collection, seed cleaning, and seed storage be passed down from generation to generation. It is when we practice food sovereignty, seed collection, that we protect our culture. It helps to ensure that our bodies, our minds, and our spirits are kept strong and healthy. So I'd like to wish each of you a wonderful day, and if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to my email, which is on the slide in front of you. Thank you again. Goodbye.